Hello, family. This is still the day the Lord has made, and we're here to rejoice and be glad in it. I want to thank you for tuning in to another segment of the Hope TV broadcast, and I pray that you're blessed. I pray everybody's happy. I pray everybody is safe, and I pray that cabin fever is not getting to you too much. I pray the kids haven't eaten up all the groceries and get on your nerves. Hoping you're finding some peace and some joy even in times of pandemic. Absolutely, these are unprecedented times, and of course, these are uncharted waters that we're navigating. But I want you to know that with the power of God and with resilience and the human spirit, if we're resolute, we can get through this. So I want to thank you for tuning in, and I appreciate you so very much for tuning into this segment of the Hope TV. As you know, we started our first broadcast. For those of you who may not know, but we started our first broadcast on March 19th, something we call pastoring in a pandemic. And who would have ever thought that on March 19th, that a month later, we have now 17 flagship shows that we're offering on a weekly basis, and that we'll be offering content 5-6 times per day via the Hope TV. So thank you so very much for your support. I mean, you've been tuning in literally from all over the world, and we appreciate you. And for your calls and for your emails and your social media messages. Thank you so very much for your support and your encouragement. Our team has been inspired and encouraged. They are working diligently to ensure that we bring you some positive, empowering content. I want to thank them, our technology department, our media ministry. They're doing a supercalifragilisticexpialidocious job in ensuring that we bring stuff that's going to be holistic. And if you're watching and you've not yet taken the time to follow us on all things social media, please follow us at the Hope TV. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, you can follow the YouTube channel and Twitter, and so make sure that you follow, like links to other people. Our goal is to minister holistically, and so we want to talk about things that affect us spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, and we're dealing with the whole person. So we're engaged in things that have built us up from the perspective of our families, of finances, vocation, fitness, just a variety of subjects. I want to thank you for that. So make sure you follow us on all things social media. Also, if you're not yet followed the church on social media, please take a moment and do it as well. Part of our duty, as you know, in terms of being good citizens, we want to make sure that we're engaged in civic and social and political affairs. And so to that end, this is one of our first shows called the Town Hall, because we want to make sure that we have conversations that not only affect us in terms of the life and our ecclesial lives, but of course our lives outside of the church. And so much affects us. You know, Jesus calls us to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, which means we have to make an impact and have to be engaged from a civic perspective. And so to that end, we started the town hall to make sure we deal with things that affect us, things that we need to be aware of. We've been working diligently to get people to register for the census, and I thank God for all of you who did register. Very, very important that you sign up for the census, because our local municipalities are affected positively or negatively based upon how we approach the census. And so that's been our key emphasis through Town Hall the past couple of weeks, and thanks to all of you who have responded accordingly. Today, I'm very, very excited on this episode of the Town Hall to present a powerful, powerful human being. She's a powerful woman who I was blessed to make her acquaintance some years ago. She grew up in a hardworking, blue-collar background, came up in public school. She came up like many of us, so she has the ability to relate. She's a believer. She's a Christian. She was able to matriculate at Washington and Lee University and receive her Master of Business Administration from Harvard Business School. She is a Christian. She used her entrepreneurial and business acumen to help in terms of building her family business, the Jack Cooper Trucking Company. And when her family acquired that company had 120 employees. And in just short order, in a short while, it grew from 120 employees to over 3,000 employees, dealing with those who work in trucking and those who work in the unions, looking out for those people who really sometimes are omitted by Main Street and Wall Street, rather. And so she's been very, very active and very, very serious about that. A few years ago, when the economy tanked and people were trying to figure out what to do with their companies when other corporations their health care for their employees. This company made sure that they provided 100% health care costs for their employees, the type of individual that she is. And we're blessed. I was blessed to meet her as she ran for lieutenant governor alongside Stacey Abrams a few years ago. And unfortunately, those two sisters were not able to finish the race, not because of anything they've done. It's a different story for a different day. I don't want to get upset right now and go into my rant. You know, I'm trying so hard to not use profanity, so I don't want to get into that right now. But should have been our governor and our lieutenant governor of this wonderful state of Georgia. But she's back this time, not running for the lieutenant governorship of Georgia, but running for the U.S. Senate of Georgia. And we are excited about who she is and what she brings to the table. And she will be, when she wins, or if she wins, when that time comes, the first woman to be elected a senator in Georgia, the first to be elected, and that'll be a huge, huge, huge feat. She's married and they raised her two daughters together. Her and her husband raised her two daughters together. She's a Christian. She is a believer, believe in the human spirit and believe in diversity and love. And she is an advocate for those who are hard workers. And so I want to welcome here today, soon to be U.S. Senator of Georgia, Sarah Amico. Sarah, how are you today?
For the opportunity to come. You know, I have a great warm spot in my heart for the House of Hope. Y'all feel like a second church family for us, and you've welcomed us. And I'm sorry that the last time we were together it was in person, and today it'll have to be by social distancing. But what a blessing it is to be back with y'all today. Thank you for the chance to come and have a conversation.
Well, you know, you're always so vibrant. You're always so positive and so thoughtful and so contemplative. In our church, you're absolute favorite at our church because of authenticity. You know, I was brought up, the old people would tell me, well, that's what's from the heart reaches the heart. And every time you've spoken, and those who've been blessed to meet you always feel that authenticity and that genuineness. I just want to thank you for that, because when many people are skeptical of those who are in political office, sometimes there's a lot of distrust, I guess. But with you, you're able to kind of navigate through all that and make people who are really defensive to pull those walls down, because we can feel the genuineness. And I want to thank you for that. It means a whole lot. You know, one of the things that I appreciate about you is just your comfort level with dealing with anybody. You know, whether it's whether you got an invitation to the barbecue, or whether you're going to the governor's mansion, or you know, or the big gala somewhere downtown. It seems that you have the ability to be flexible. I want to talk about that because it seems that many people have lost touch for just the blue collar, the union worker, the truck driver. What birthed that for you, just that affinity that you have with just common people?
Well, first and foremost, I just appreciate the kind words and encouragement. If the coronavirus hasn't taught us the importance of community, the importance of what I view as a scripture-based dignity and worth of every human being, I don't know what will. So I think the way I was brought up, I grew up in a small town in the Ozarks. Went to public school, as you mentioned, but it was actually the only public high school where I grew up. So it was the kind of place where you couldn't get away with much, even as a teenager, because your mama would know what you did before you got home. And I think we grew up learning that the strength of our community was not in our similarities, but in the rich diversity of people around us. That everybody had different experiences, different things to add to the conversation, right? And so for me, when we talk about working families, and part of why my passion, particularly in public policy, is around the economic security of our working families, that was my family, right? My granddad was a custodian in my dad's elementary school. He worked his way up to being a maintenance worker at a General Motors factory. a machinist, and ultimately a building inspector, and retired as a city manager in Decatur, Missouri. So if you want to talk about living the American dream, my grandparents didn't come from much. My folks grew up pretty poor. We've had access to opportunity that would literally only exist for our family in this world. I love going down to see the truck drivers in our Atlanta terminal for the business. My granddad and on the other side, and my uncle were truck drivers. My cousins and I grew up with a deep respect for the dignity of work and what it means to be able to provide for your family. My grandmother, who lives here in Marietta, actually, she just celebrated a couple weeks ago her 85th birthday. She started work when she was 6 years old on a farm, and she retired 4 months shy of her 80th birthday. And so we were just expected growing up to be folks who worked hard and respected the dignity of everyone, no matter their job. It didn't matter if you were the CEO or the secretary, if you were the teacher or the janitor. You had inherent worth because you were created in the image of the God of the universe. And I like to believe that forms the foundation of not just my worldview, but of how I believe public policy should treat every human being. I tell the story frequently, Pastor, of my family climbing out of poverty. My dad got to go to college because he got a work co-op program where he could work in a General Motors factory for 6 weeks in St. Louis. And then the next 6 weeks, he'd move to Flint, Michigan and go to college. And every 6 weeks, he'd move back and forth. And that's how he paid his way through college. So we don't take any of this for granted. We understand that as business owners and as human beings, the ability to provide those families with health insurance, with a paycheck to provide for their families, with retirement security, with the right to form a union, that's something just this side of magic in this world. So I think we grew up with that innate belief in the dignity of every human being, but also in a deep respect for the dignity of work.
Wow, that's an amazing story. One of the things when you talk about, growing up and seeing the things that your grandfather went through, and on both sides, and he worked himself up from a janitor. Seems like you even brought those things into your company. When you started, began to take over Jack Cooper, which was a family business and dating back to the 20s. And when you took the company over, one of the that I mentioned earlier was when the economy kind of tanked instead of holding back, investing in terms of your employees, you wanted to make sure that they had 100% health care. And so in a time when it may not be savvy to do that, if you're just looking at profits, you guys made a decision to make sure that your employees were taken care of. I think that's incredibly generous, empathetic, and compassionate capitalism. How would you juxtapose that with what we're seeing now happening in this climate when people are getting bailed out and really not ensuring that that trickles down to those who need it?
Yeah, the contrast couldn't be clearer. David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler are two senators here in Georgia. I'm running against David Perdue. They've actually profited off of this pandemic that's killing people all over our state and around our country. Instead of coming forward after what the federal government, and not just our intelligence community, but the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health, all three of those entities hosted a closed-door Senate meeting on January 24th. Instead of coming out of that meeting and telling the people of Georgia, this is what's coming, let's prepare. And how can we best protect the health and safety of our citizens, our communities, and protect your well-being economically? They went and adjusted their stock portfolios. They made money on this crisis. It's unforgivable. And, it's nothing new for David Perdue. He's never missed a chance to profit on the backs of working folks. This is a man who became a multi-millionaire by cutting wages, jobs, benefits, and outsourcing American jobs overseas. My business career is very different. And to be fair, he's made more money than I have. But my people have health care. The people who work for me kept their retirement and their pensions. I'm proud to run a union company. I'm proud to be the only candidate in the state of Georgia running for U.S. Senate who has the support of labor unions, 5 so far. But the reason we have that is they don't have to ask where I stand. They know that for the last 17 years as a business person, I've been a reliable backer of working families, putting in my own money to save jobs when the economy was tough during the Great Recession, to save healthcare. And last year, when we fell victim to the president's trade war, which has stricken so many of Georgia's farming families and small businesses or manufacturing companies around this nation, we again walked away from our own equity to save those 3,000 jobs, make sure we're still paying 100% of the health insurance premiums for our employees, and protect the retirement savings and pensions for thousands of employees and retirees. So, I couldn't think of a more stark contrast. And Georgians this year, in June 9th, you're going to have a chance to vote for who will be the Democratic nominee running against David Perdue, the man who's profited from this pandemic, who has never once held a town hall, who sits blindly and silently at the elbow of the president while he gives rubbish briefings on the state of coronavirus, while he gets booed at a baseball game. It takes a lot, by the way, to get anything that's not the Red Sox and the Yankees booing each other in a baseball game, right? But this is the guy that sits next to Trump and acts like that's normal. And you're going to have to choose. You have the power to choose the woman who gets to run against him. And we're going to be in tough economic times. Man, I wish I could say something different, but these are going to be hard moments. 22 million Americans have filed jobless claims for the first time in the last few weeks. Georgia, unfortunately, has seen over 500,000. And just to put it in perspective, the Great Recession, the high water mark of jobless claims was 8.6 million people. So we're almost 3 times that right now in just the first month of this crisis. You're going to want a senator sitting up in Washington fighting for your family, fighting for working people, fighting for anyone, that's not just big business and GOP donors. And the way that I think we get there is by running someone against David Perdue, who can say, you wait just a minute. Don't tell me how you created jobs or how successful your business was. Your success should be measured by the well-being of the people who worked for you. And you failed. We've got a choice here between choosing an economy that works only for a very wealthy few, or putting leaders in Washington like me who believe everybody should have a fair shot in this economy, that everybody should be able to have a story like my granddad's. And let's be honest, that's not enough. We've got to do that and address some of the systemic institutional level bias that still exists in our economy along gender and race lines. I'm very proud of my family, and I don't want to take anything away from what they've done to climb out of abject generational poverty over the last couple generations. But the reality is they were never redlined out of a neighborhood. They had access to jobs and education, credit to build a business that they almost certainly wouldn't have had if they hadn't been white. And for me, that's not acceptable. That's not the world I want my daughters to live in. I want us to live up to the promise of this nation's loftiest ideals, that we are all entitled to equal opportunity, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that there's innate and endowed from our Creator these rights. And until it applies to everyone, the work is not finished.
When you talk about this whole thing of systemic racism and privilege and power, unfortunately, I'm having this conversation with you now. In many ways, I think because of that same, institutionalization of how we've seen things, the whole status quo. You were an extremely viable candidate along with Stacey Abrams, who I felt represented, both of you, the hope of Georgia and the hope of a new frontier, for lack of a better phrase. And I've been just absolutely appalled and disgusted, to say the least, by the actions of the gentleman who actually use power to get the election. And on yesterday, and I've just been, as I've spoken to friends across the country, it's been embarrassing to see how Governor Kemp has handled this pandemic. Just the level of incompetence has been unfathomable. And a decision was made on yesterday to reopen the economy, reopen Georgia this coming weekend, the skeleton crew. I want to say a lot about that, but I prefer to defer to you now because I've been on social media on my soapbox. But I want to hear from you. What is your opinion? What is your perspective in terms of the governor's handling of this pandemic?
Yeah, it's been an abysmal failure. Governor Kemp, who rode to that office in a wave of voter suppression that targeted communities of color and poor folks in our state, who will forever be the asterisk governor, has proven himself absolutely incapable of the task of managing the public health and safety of our communities. He was apparently the last person in the country to know you could transmit this disease without symptoms. He was summarily, dismissed nationally as a joke for that, and rightly so. And, it's hard to know what's in a person's heart. I hope it wasn't dishonesty. In this instance, you'd almost rather it be just sheer incompetence that led him to make a statement like that. But I don't know what the mix is. The reality is we have not increased our surge capacity. We are not testing enough people for this virus to open anything. Literally, my sister was sick for 3 weeks. We're 99% sure she had COVID-19, but she couldn't even get a test. She's lucky. She's young and healthy, but she also has 4 kids and a husband at home. And, self-isolating in a house with 4 kids is a challenge. And it's, she's just one person. The reality is we were 46 out of 50 states in testing. And you can't do anything to reopen the economy until it's safe for the health of our communities. I have grandparents down the street who are in their late 80s. I have parents who are in their mid 60s. I have a niece who's been battling bone cancer and unfortunately, just suffered a really horrific loss of her leg in that fight. She's immunocompromised. These are the people who are counting on us, counting on our leaders to do the right thing to protect our people. So no, I'm not impressed. I don't think he's reopening anything. All he's done is giving our frontline healthcare workers, the worst case scenario. There may well be a second wave of infections. It's interesting too. He didn't reopen things we couldn't live without. He reopened bowling alleys and tattoo parlors. And by the way, how do you do social distancing? How do you maintain a distance of at least 6 feet when somebody's cutting your bangs or trimming your hair or painting your nails or giving you a massage? He's reopening massage parlors, by definition, a service that requires physical touch. This is not normal and it's not okay. He's the last person in the country to know asymptomatic carriers can transmit the disease. And now he wants to be the first to open. And God help us all, because I worry about the nurses, the women and men who work in everything from custodial services to registration at our hospitals, our physicians, who are the people, EMTs, gosh, the frontline workers in this pandemic. He's put them all at terrible risk of a second wave of infections. We still don't have increased capacity for ventilators. We still have rural communities without hospitals. And my mom was a nurse back in the 70s, a NICU nurse. And my aunt just retired after about 30 years as an infectious disease control RN nurse. And my grandmother cleaned hotel rooms and mostly hospital rooms when I was old enough to remember, but was a maid in a hospital, housekeeper in hotels and hospitals until I was in high school and she retired. My maternal grandmother, I think about the workers like that. They don't have a choice whether or not to show up. And then you're creating a whole other problem. Sorry to soapbox here, but man, this one really gets me going. There are going to be families that now have folks who have to go back to work. And I worry, are they going to be disqualified from unemployment insurance if they decide they can't go back to work right now because they've got an elderly loved one they care for in their home, or someone who's immunocompromised, going through chemotherapy for cancer? Geez, I mean, this is not reasonable. And you're putting those families in a terrible position. Our schools are closed. I've seen the governor indicate absolutely nothing about what he's going to do for childcare costs for families who usually are working while their kids are at school, or how he's going to handle folks who may suddenly not be able to return to work for whatever reason, whether that's childcare or caregiving status for a family member at home. It's been an absolute failure. And one of the things I think about is that elections really matter. President Obama said it best: elections have consequences. And I'm sorry that we didn't get across the finish line in 2018. I loved running for lieutenant governor, and especially running alongside Stacey Abrams. And the fact that we got endorsed by former President Barack Obama and were able to campaign with him had to have been one of the highlights of my life. But what I will say is, I don't want your folks to be discouraged, right? I mean, let's go back to the text. His mercies are new every morning, and every morning is exactly what he means. That was not a loss in 2018. That was a first step. We built the most diverse electoral coalition Democrats have ever seen in this state. Stacey and I got more votes for any Democrats running for governor and lieutenant governor than anyone in the history of our states. By the way, my 1.83 or so million votes, that's 500,000 more votes than Senator Perdue has ever won. So don't let anybody tell you we can't beat him, because we can. But we also tripled the Latinx turnout. We tripled the Asian American Pacific Islander turnout. We increased the youth vote by 139%. And more Black voters voted for Stacey in 2018 than voted in the entire 2014 midterms here in Georgia. So this was not a loss. This was a victory for the kind of world that we want to live in, and for the number of Georgians who were willing to wait, sometimes in 3-hour-long lines, to get to the ballot box to say, I believe in better. And I think these women can bring it. And, God willing, you'll get to vote for both of us again on a ballot soon.
You said a lot. There's a lot of meat still left on that bone. I want to kind of parse it a little bit more. It's been said that when America catches a cold, the African American community catches pneumonia. And Governor Kemp's decision to reopen the government in these difficult it's a lunatic almost, completely idiotic. But with the numbers and how the data indicates that we're 6 times more likely as African Americans to have fatalities as a result of COVID-19. I mean, Louisiana, where 70% of the deaths, Michigan and Illinois, where 40% of the deaths were African American. And there's a lot of ambiguity, and there's a lot of concern where it almost feels as if, for some people, that there's absolutely no regard, or maybe the decision to reopen the government. And I don't want to push. I'm just being honest with you. A lot of people feel as if, because it seems that it's affecting more communities more. I don't put words in your mouth, but this has been a very, very it's a regularly expressed sentiment within the African American community that many people feel is there's a lot of distrust, as if it's an attack or a lack of regard for our communities. And I know there's some things that you can't necessarily say in that regard, but I just want to get your take on that. Should there be a connection with how it affects our communities disproportionately? And it seems like the governor's office is absolutely silent about that disproportionality.
Yeah, the governor is silent on many things that have a negative impact that's disproportionate to the African American population. The voter suppression that we saw in 2018, the closure of 214 polling places in this state, predominantly in poor or minority communities, Look at the difference in predominantly white precincts in terms of the length of line folks waited in versus some of our places in Fulton and DeKalb County last cycle, where folks were waiting in line. There weren't enough machines. In some cases, there were power cords missing from voting machines. I don't even know how that's possible. There's no question that voters, particularly in communities of color, were impacted by the voter suppression that happened in 2018 when this governor was the Secretary of State overseeing his own election, who was supposed to be looking out for your right to vote. But that's not all. In Georgia, our maternal mortality rate, just like it is around the country, is consistently higher for Black women than it is for white women, 3 to 4 times as high nationwide. But here in Georgia, sometimes that's as high as 6 times higher for Black women. And I haven't seen Governor Kemp get up in arms and move heaven and earth to try to fix that either. And so it's not a surprise to me, or to be honest, anybody else who's paying attention, that the racial disparity in the COVID-19 pandemic is also ignored by this governor. And so I can't speak to his motives, but what I can say is this is what happens when you refuse to acknowledge the systemic racial bias in our healthcare system. Our communities of color have been consistently marginalized. The data shows that they receive different care. I don't know how to say it. I'm new to politics, but man, I've been good at math for a long time. And this isn't an opinion. It's just science. It's data that consistently shows there is a bias in our healthcare system. And it's one of the things that's so frustrating as a person who's not a politician to watch, because it is a fixable, solvable problem if you have leaders that have the spine and the willingness to take it on. We just don't. And it's amazing, because the first thing every politician wants you to know is that the only people who should be in government are more politicians, right? I mean, how many times have we heard that? I can tell you, by the way, the last thing Washington, D.C. needs right now is more politicians. Maybe some more doctors, nurses, union members, small business owners, those of us who are actually dealing with the consequences of some of these failed policies. But people talk about, well, the way it works is, or when we govern, we should do this. And I just want to say it's not working. Tell that to families who've lost a loved one because they couldn't get to a hospital in their rural communities. Tell that to somebody who sits in the Medicaid coverage gap without health insurance in the middle of a pandemic because the Republicans in our state were too vicious and mean to do the right thing and take our own federal tax dollars back to our state to care for our people. That's not about policy. That's just partisan, pandering pettiness. It's the stuff that the rest of us sit at home and say, how in the world do these guys end up in office? And it's part of the reason I tell people, they're like, why would you go from being a business person for 17 years, a small business owner, fighting through the Great Recession, fighting through the trade wars, looking in the belly of the beast at this pension crisis that really threatens the retirement security of millions of working families around this country. Why transition from that to running for the U.S. Senate? And I tell them very simply, because I don't think these guys are going to get it done. The same old players, the same old systems, the same old conversations, they're leaving working people in the dust. They're leaving small business owners holding the bag while big businesses get tax breaks and bonuses, and they get bailout funds before we do. I've got 2 businesses that were applying for that payroll protection program the Small Business Administration put forward to help folks survive this pandemic. Neither one of us got through. Now, somehow Ruth's Chris managed to get twice the limit. The limit was $10 million in assistance. Ruth's Chris managed to get 20. That's a hell of a hat trick. But a bunch of mom and pop shops, they probably do feel like they have to open right now with Governor Kemp's order because they don't know how else to make ends meet. They were shut out of that program just like we were. But if you put some of us up in Washington in that Senate, and we actually, I don't think there's a single businesswoman in the Democratic caucus in the United States Senate. I think Mark Warner from Virginia is a businessman. But I don't know really that there's that many of those voices. We got plenty of attorneys, plenty of politicians, and they all play a really important role. But this year, maybe we need some new folks. There's an independent candidate up in Alaska running named Al Gross, Dr. Al Gross. He's a physician and also has a master's in public health. I'd love a little bit of that in our policy making right about now. Here in Georgia, you've got Dr. Michelle Au running for state senate. She's a physician, she and her husband on the front lines of this pandemic. This is one of the reasons people in this country get so discouraged by politics, to be honest. They're tired of the ineptitude of the same old politicians. So I tell people I'm sort of like that guy in Network that throws open his window, right? So I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Think about it. In the last 11 years, I've provided paid leave for my employees because the federal government couldn't get its act together and get it done. I've provided 100% fully funded health insurance, again, because there was no hope that was ever coming from the federal government. I've protected my unions and their right to organize and engage in collective bargaining, which Lord knows most of our Republican representatives in the state wouldn't have. And we've even provided on-site childcare in our Kennesaw, Georgia headquarters because we knew that the federal government didn't have a prayer of addressing affordable childcare, which is a real burden for working families, as long as it's under Mitch McConnell and the Republicans. So at a certain point, I've been doing more of David Perdue's job for my employees than he's done, protecting their pensions, protecting their health care. So I don't want to hear this nonsense about the only people who should be in government are people in government. I want some people who actually have to be out there fighting these battles on behalf of the people who are counting on us to get this right. And that's the role I'm hoping to play in this election. And by the way, I think that's the reason I will beat David Perdue.
It's just so refreshing to hear this conversation because when you say it, I believe it, and just listening to what you just talked about, I think 43,000 millionaires received on average, I think about $1.6 million from the bailout. And like you hear, I'm a pastor of a church, with over 50 employees, and we haven't met in 6 or 7 weeks, which is debilitating, in terms of your operations. But at the same time, not one of our staff members has gone without being compensated, even though we haven't met corporately since March 8th, because on the very front end of this pandemic, we decided to prioritize public safety. And as you just said, so here we are, a church, a nonprofit that's receiving nothing from the government, but still making sure that our people are taken care of, as you are, healthcare, everything, every expense. And yet Ruth Chris gets $20 million. It's laughable, and it's appalling. And so when people, because you've said so much, but today, and that's been powerful, and again, you just validated why we have such an affinity and appreciation for you. But when people come to vote and to cast a vote for you, I want them to clearly know what they are voting for. What are the 3 top things in terms of your platform, or things you hope to accomplish? I just want them to, because you've said so many awesome things, and I just want to kind of put it in a nutshell, in a rubric, and a portable format for people to really know when they get Sarah Amico, what do they get in terms of a candidate and a public servant?
3 things, I think, right off the bat. First and foremost, somebody who believes nobody should be poor because they're sick, or sick simply because they're poor. We have got to solve this problem for America's working families. It's critical, not just for our health and well-being, but for the kind of world we want to live in, the kind of world we want to leave to our kids. So healthcare is definitely the issue that pushed me into running for office. Secondly, I want to be a champion for working people. I don't think we have one. Right now, we've got 2 champions in the U.S. Senate from Georgia for their own stock portfolios, and I could give a hoot about their portfolios. I want somebody who's up there dogging every other senator in that chamber until they protect your family's right to fair wages, fair retirement, collective bargaining, an equal opportunity independent of the color of your skin or who you love or how you pray or if you pray. I want to know that American dream doesn't just exist for people who look, love, live, pray like the president. And by the way, I'd like a new one of those too. But secondly is definitely economic justice and security. I want to be a champion, and not just a new one. Remember, this is a 17-year career and a lifelong passion for me. I remember what it was like to be 11 years old when my dad lost his job, and to have to talk with my sisters and my parents about that. I know some of these families are hurting, and I want you to feel like you've got Sarah Amico sitting in that U.S. Senate fighting for you like you're my own family. So second is economic security and opportunity. And the third one is your right to vote. Man, if we don't get this right, we can't fix all the other policies, right? We have got to make sure that every eligible voter can exercise his or her right to vote. And that means making Election Day a holiday, perhaps. It means in many instances, we may want to look at expanding not just this year, but in every year, vote by mail capabilities, sending absentee ballots to all eligible voters. And by the way, shame on the Republicans who tell us that they can't do that because then there'll never be any more Republicans elected. Well, serves you right. Because for those of you who are eating away at the roots of our democracy, maybe you don't deserve to be there anymore. So expanding, not contracting, the universe of people who can participate in this American experience, not just economically, but in terms of your right to vote, that we really give the voice back to the people of this country, and protecting the security of our elections. I want to be clear. I am the worst nightmare for any foreign power who feels empowered to meddle in our democracy. I am dogged and relentless and beholden to nobody but the voters of this state. And I will protect and secure American elections. I'll also make sure we update the standards for our voting equipment. The reality is there's a federal committee, the EAC, that regulates the voting apparatuses we use. They have not updated their standards since before the invention of the iPhone. You did not mishear that. They have not updated the standards for our technology since before the invention of the iPhone because our federal government is so dysfunctional, they can't agree on incremental changes. So I'm going to be a champion for voting rights, a champion for working families, and a champion for your family's access to high quality, affordable, and accessible, no matter where you live in the state, accessible healthcare. Those are the three things I hope define me. And I also understand we live in an environment where climate change poses an existential threat to the health and well-being of our communities, that it will disproportionately impact marginalized and poor communities and many of our communities of color, and that it's a direct threat to our food supply, our agricultural industry. I'd like my kids to live in a world with clean air and clean water, and I don't think that's overly ambitious to ask. And I want to make sure that we repair the damage done to our democratic institutions, from having a president that calls the press the enemy of the people, to the federal judiciary, which has been packed with unqualified, hyper-partisan ideologues for judges. Those are the things we need to fix. And we don't have a lot of time if we want to get this right.
You've been so clear, and we've been just incredibly impressed with your platform, your presentation, your personality, and we know what we can get from you, what your promise is, what your brand is, what your platform is. But I also know there's some things that you're not getting. You don't take any PAC money in super PAC. So what are some things that we can do for you? How can we help you during this time?
Yeah, we're not taking any corporate PACs. Thank you. We're not taking any corporate PAC money. I don't believe in dark money in our system. I think we deserve to know who's putting in for whom in these elections. And I'd like to know what they expect in return if they're pouring in millions of dollars they don't want us to know about. That seems pretty reasonable. So for us, we need folks who will help us spread the word. It's such a blessing to be able to come on this program. I am not a politician, as you can probably tell from just this brief conversation. I'm a public policy nerd, but fundamentally, I'm just somebody who believes we can do a heck of a lot better than we've got right now. And I've got an incredible track record for the last 17 years of doing that as a business person, fighting for the kinds of issues politicians only talk about. I create the kind of jobs politicians go on TV and say we need. Instead of talking about healthcare, I actually give it to families, fully paid for. So what we need are people who can share that story. People who can join us. You can sign up for our email list at sarahforgeorgia.com. That's SARAHFOR, Georgia spelled out.com. You can sign up to volunteer at bit.ly/volunteer for Sarah. Follow us on Twitter at Sarah Riggs Amico. We really need your help to spread this message. We may not be the people in this primary on June 9th. Make sure you're registered, by the way. Check your registration, because you never know. There can be technical glitches in the system. Georgia doesn't have a great record of keeping people accurately on the voter rolls. We do have a very good record of voter purges recently, unfortunately. So make sure you're still on the rolls, and make sure your friends and family are too. But going into that June 9th primary, I'm not going to be the candidate with the most money. I'm not going to be the candidate with the most television ads. But I am going to be the only candidate who can say they ran with Stacey Abrams, traveled every nook and cranny of this state, got endorsed by President Barack Obama in 2018, got 1.8 million votes in my first run for office, 500,000 more than David Perdue has ever won. Tell people that story. Tell people that when my business went through hard times, I didn't tuck my tail like a coward and run. I did the tough, hard stuff, even to the point of restructuring my business through a bankruptcy process, giving up my own equity in the company to make sure we could save 3,000 jobs and healthcare pensions for working families. Tell them you finally found somebody who wants to run for office that suffers from true believerism, that believes in this system, believes in the dignity of workers, believes that we deserve a hell of a lot better than what we're getting from the leaders we send to Washington. It's a vote away, and with your help, we can get there. You can certainly, if you're able to chip in and contribute to the campaign, man, we appreciate that more than you know, more so now than ever in these kind of tough times. But we are going to have to spend money. We want to keep our staff. We don't want to lay folks off in this pandemic. We want to be able to buy television and radio and mail so that we can tell you about all the amazing things I want to do for you in the U.S. Senate. But we really need people to share our story. What we know is that when voters hear my message, we use a pollster named Cornell Belcher. You may have seen him on MSNBC or CNN. He polled also, I think, for Barack Obama, and he's fabulous. But what we know from our polling is that when voters hear our message, they move overwhelmingly into our camp in the primary. So we just need to amplify the story. I know a lot of people are skeptical about politicians. I can't imagine how many folks come to your church, Pastor, every 2, 4, or 6 years, depending on what office they're running for, and then mysteriously vanish in the in-between. And I sincerely hope that I won't be one of them. I hope you'll have me back as often as I'll be tolerated and still keep my invitation to the barbecue. But I also hope that I can come back and do this, answer questions, and not just the easy ones. If I screw up, I'm going to be held accountable by you. And I want you to tell me I want to learn, I want to do better. That kind of humility in the U.S. Senate right now sounds really good. And having that paired with somebody that has a battle-tested track record of fighting for people who have the least voice in our current politics could be literally, the change that we need. So I'm hopeful that we'll get a chance to come back frequently and take questions. But I'd like to continue this conversation. I know folks are skeptical of politicians. Thank the Lord I am not one. I just happen to be running for office. And so I hope people will know that my heart is in this race. I've walked away from a 17-year career with 2 little kids at home to do this full time, to advocate on your behalf. I don't take that decision lightly. And I'm doing it because I know we have the best chance of defeating David Perdue, and not just taking the Senate seat, but flipping control of the United States Senate. finally taking that gavel out of Mitch McConnell's hands so that things like universal background checks and protecting your right to vote, restoring the Voting Rights Act, protecting the pensions for working families can finally move through the logjam of the Senate Republicans who are too busy profiting off a pandemic and trading in their stock portfolios to do the jobs your families are paying them to do in Washington.
Well, as I told you the first time I met you almost 4 years ago, you have a perpetual invitation to the barbecue, and I'm speaking on behalf of our delegation, so that invitation is extended, and you don't have to bring any meat or any paper supplies or any potato chips. Just show up, and the meal and beverages and paper products will be supplied to you.
I make a very good peach cobbler, Pastor.
And your family during this time. And I just want to thank you for sharing. And you will be back, and we're going to continue to push this conversation. Thank you so much for being a part.
I'm grateful. I look forward to seeing you in person again soon, and I look forward to bringing the peach cobbler to the barbecue.
Outstanding. Family, you have been listening to this episode of Town Hall with Sarah Amico, who is a candidate for the U.S. Senate here in Georgia. She was the running partner with Sarah Abrams in 2016 for the governorship, lieutenant governorship of Georgia, and a gubernatorial race that should have been theirs, but of course some hanky-panky, some funny stuff got in the way, disenfranchisement. But looking forward, she had an opportunity. June 9th, put that date down, and she's going to be back. Please follow her on all things social media. Go to a website, check out a platform. We need people like this to represent us at any time, but especially in times like these. Again, I want to thank you for tuning in today to this episode of the Town Hall of the Hope TV. I hope you've been inspired and encouraged and got some information that you can put into practice. Share the word, let everybody know about this Town Hall with Sarah Amico. When you're hanging there, be tough. It's tough. These are some tough times, but God is not intimidated by it. God's going to see us through. So you be encouraged, and always remember this: if you be good to God, God will be good to you. You've been watching Town Hall with the Hope TV. Until next time, peace.